Hey guys, today we'll talk about the impact of the new Balance Dataslate and more specifically the top 5 units that I think you might want to replace now from your lists and what I would replace them with. So without further ado, let's dive right in. In number 5 spot, we have the Company Heroes. These guys were previously 95 points and got a 10 points bump, and now they cost 105. The 10 points increase by itself obviously is not that much. It doesn't make them inefficient or a bad unit or overly expensive. It brings up a question whether we need to consider replacing them, because for all these sub 100 points units, every 5-10 points matter, because usually we first start our list with units that are expensive and something that we desperately need, we need it for our list structure, and then we end up trying to cram as many scoring options as possible, and that's where having extra 5 and 10 points can really matter. So that's why we're talking about that. Usually the purpose of the Company Heroes were to bodyguard a captain for us, some captain that we really wanted in the list for a particular reason. It could have been Vulcan Hestan for the rerolls for the Melta weapons that he brings, or it could have been Uriel Ventris, more popular option probably, and he is now less efficient, and why we're going to talk about a bit later in the video. Don't get me wrong, he's still a very good character and would not say that you don't want to run Ventris at all. For that purpose of bodyguarding a character and also being an extra scoring unit that is relatively durable, the Company Heroes are pretty good still, but the newly discounted Blade Guard veterans, they now feel like a very good alternative. They possess a much higher volume and quality of attacks in melee, making them a better option for a captain that you want to send into combat, for a melee focused captain. Also save a whopping 25 points, and as we discussed, 25 points can be difference between, I don't know, having a Ballistus Dreadnought and having a full Gladiator Lancer, for example. Obviously, it's not a one-to-one change, and the 3 Blade Guard veterans are less durable than 4 Company Heroes, because Company Heroes are 4 wounds each, the veterans are 3 wounds each, and also Company Heroes have -1 to wound. The Blade Guard veterans have 4+ invulnerable save instead, which can be much more helpful than the -1 to wound for some applications, so it depends on what is going to attack them. But just generally speaking, the Company Heroes are going to be more durable, point for point. For situations where you desperately need points and you have nowhere to get them from, and you had Company Heroes, and you can now swap them into a squad of Blade Guard veterans, I think they can be a very good option. Plus, you can also pay an extra 55 points on top of the new cost of the Company Heroes to get the Blade Guard veteran to be a 6-man squad. So it's a 6-man squad with a captain, and that is a totally different kind of a unit that can be a real melee threat to a lot of things, especially if you're playing a detachment where you have access to something like Honor the Chapter for +1 to wound and extra AB. And also don't forget, the Company Heroes also did not give any buff to the captain himself, where the Blade Guard veterans can actually give the captain reroll 1s to hit in combat, which is essentially like having full rerolls to hit for something that hits on 2+. These guys are definitely not gonna go away with this change, but I urge you to at least consider taking a look at the Blade Guard veterans. Now a word from the sponsor of this video, Adapt Roll. So Adapt Roll is essentially what's called a Warhammer calculator. Imagine we have a situation like this. We have an Armiger Warglaive and 4 Alaris Custodians, and we need to figure out how much damage will this squad do to the Warglaive. And we have weird questions like, do we need 4 models? Is 3 models enough? What happens if like Warglaive kills one on Overwatch or something like this? Should we choose the lethal hit scatter or the sustained hit scatter, considering these guys already have full rerolls to wound? And this is where the calculator, like Adapt Roll, comes in. I'll show you the interface of the app briefly, because obviously there are so many features here and constantly new ones are added, so I cannot show you everything in one video. But in general, this is what you will encounter when you download it, and it's free to download as well. You have your attacker profile at the top and the defender profile under it, and you have the option of downloading the profiles directly from Battlescribe by pressing the button on the top left here and choosing a gallery of all the factions, and all the profiles of those factions will be right there directly in the interface, and you just need to click view units, select the ones that you really want to add, like say Biologist Purifier, Blind Lord Terminators, and you click import selected units, and then you can go into the interface, and I've already preloaded the Alaris Custodians here. We'll add them, and here we have the spears, and We even have the modifiers for the spears, which is the reroll to wound against vehicles and monsters. We already have them inbuilt into the profile. I've changed it because initially it doesn't have it, obviously, because the weapon is not really carrying that modifier. It's the unit that carries it. But I decided that I want to have the twin linked added here, and I just go into modifiers, select twin linked, and it's gonna stay there if I want to save it as a part of this profile. And then we go to defenders, we choose Armiger Warglaive, and then we just need to change the amount of attacks. Because we have 4 guys here in the squad, we will have 20 attacks, and we can give them whatever modifiers we want, and there are a lot of them here, as you can see. Now we can just press process results, and we'll get a result. We did not add any katas, which we obviously can add lethal hits and sustained hits, and we can see we have dead models here, failed saves and damage. The pink bar underneath shows the results without modifiers. We can also see the graphs of how many dead models we're gonna get, and like one dead model is about 61.5% chance of these 4 guys killing the Warglaive, and how many hits on the target they're gonna have. I highly recommend checking out the Adept Roll app because it is really useful. I use it on a daily basis. It's also very useful in a competitive scene where, for example, you have a break in between the rounds, and you know your next opponent is going to have particular units. Say you're playing against Death Guard, and they have Death Shroud Terminators, which are extremely popular now, and you want to figure out how much damage you need to put from your unit into the Death Shroud to make sure they go down and they stay down. And this is something that you can do on the fly without rolling the dice and spending a lot of time. So I highly recommend it. Check out the Adept Roll. The link is going to be in the description. Well, thank you, Yuri, for that ad, and thank you guys for your attention, and we continue. So Ballistus Dreadnought is number 4, and we've already covered this guy numerous times on the channel, and the reason for that is it's a very interesting case of a unit that has a lot of good stuff about it, but also underwhelms in many cases, and people expect too much from it, and that brings a lot of disappointment for a lot of players. My arguments that I made a while ago still are pretty much the same, minus the fact that we now have the +1 to wound available with Oath of Moment for most chapters, not Bloodless Angels and stuff like that, but for most of your Codex chapters, all of the Codex chapters actually, we have the option to make his shooting much more reliable by wounding on 3s and 2s instead of 3s, 4s, maybe even 5s. And also Vindicator, who was back when I was describing the Ballistus 175 points, is now 185 points with a 10 points increase. So potentially being the best shooting platform in the Codex, that being more expensive, would logically make the Ballistus more interesting to us. But other than that, I think that the higher quality vehicle units that we have available in the Space Marine Codex, despite them being more expensive, I think they are much more lethal on average, and therefore I think they have more reasons to actually be in your list than the cheaper but less effective choice, which is the Ballistus. I simply trust the Vindicator or Gladiator Lancer more than I trust this guy, plus potentially we have some great options like the Eradicators and Inceptors that take the +1 to wound modifier like absolute champions. Also, whenever I talk about this guy on the channel, the comments usually start to fill up with people who talk about how disappointing the Ballistus Dreadnought was, because you think that it's 4 pretty decent anti-tank shots from a Dreadnought, which sounds pretty good, right? But most people who usually don't run these in 3s, they run 1, 2 of them, and they think that, well, it should do about like 5 or something wounds to a tank, and like half shots end up missing, 1 shot doesn't wound, and then your opponent rolls a save against the last one, and the Ballistus did nothing, and that just happens quite often. So I think the Ballistus got a lot of bad rep from just people expecting too much from an all-shooting Dreadnought, despite it being a very cheap all-shooting Dreadnought, so we should take that into account as well. 140 points, therefore, it's still a valid choice, and it isn't something you positively must replace in your list if you have found extra, whatever, 20, 30 points that you now have to get somewhere in order to preserve the quantity of these Dreadnoughts, because I expect you have at least 2, probably 3 of them. If, however, you don't have those points, I would at least consider looking into your list and seeing whether you, for example, can consume one of the redundant scoring units you have. And I know from talking with my clients on Patreon, people nowadays tend to over-invest into scoring units and under-invest into the actual damage dealing component of the list. So it's very possible that you might have some 80-90 points that you can cut in order to upgrade the Ballistus to 3 Vindicators. And believe me, you will thank me for this change later. And even if not for the Vindicators, which are 185 points, so significantly more expensive, it could be 3 Lancers, which is 165 each, so a much easier thing pill to swallow. Now the Predators. These guys I've always been very skeptical about recommending because they are an old model, a very, very high chance that next edition or the one after it, they're going to be legended, and that is always not a nice thing when that happens to your models. Plus, they very often simply lack the characteristics that I would like to see in them, those that their Primaris counterparts actually have. The reason why they are now on our surgical table is because the Annihilator has increased in cost by 5 points to 135, and the Destructor for some reason is 140 points, which I honestly don't understand. The Annihilator, if you don't know, has 3 good last cannon shots, essentially 1 in the turret, which has twin linked, and the other 2 in the sponsons, and those don't have twin linked, so essentially 3 last cannon shots. They have reroll damage against monsters and vehicles. It used to be reroll 1s, now it's full reroll to wound, which you would use to get rid of those 1s and 2s you sometimes roll on the damage. And it's a pretty helpful rule, which translates into about 4.7 wounds to a 3+ save vehicle in cover from a Predator Annihilator. So nowhere even close to killing the thing, but yeah, that's pretty much what you can expect. It's not bad, but it obviously lags behind significantly compared to the Gladiator Lancer, which would do about 8.4 wounds in the same scenario. Predators also lack the cheap durability factor that the Ballistus have, which Ballistus is still, despite being 140 points, it's still a 2+ save vehicle that has 1 more wound, so 12 wounds compared to the 11 wounds on the Predators, and it can make a difference. Destructor also raises questions in my mind because I don't really understand why you would want to run this thing. Its main gun is only AP1, which is effectively AP0 in Warhammer. Yes, it's damage 3, but the damage 3 only works well, and it does work well against priority targets. It only works well when you have good AP to back it up, like the AP4 we have on the Macroplasma Incinerator of my beloved Redemptor Dreadnought. Otherwise, you are literally paying for what I could call a useless gun, because for 140 points, this gun is not really going to do much against almost anything. It was a perfect spot actually to give Space Marines a rule similar to the Castigator. I understand that with Space Marines it would make the Destructor much more expensive, but still the Sisters somehow managed to have a Castigator which gives the entire army an AP bonus, and obviously the Space Marines would need to pay more for it, but still, and that coupled with an Immolator that ignores cover actually makes the combo of 3 Castigators very dangerous. With the Destructor we don't have that. We can run a Storm Speeder who could give us a similar kind of a rule, but it's not exactly the same thing, and the Storm Speeder is much easier to destroy compared to an other tank. So this is another case of that good versus great kind of argument where, yeah, neither of these vehicles, the Ballistus, especially the Predators less so, but still, neither of them are bad, but I just like when the vehicle really has the potential to perform and be the menace that it needs to be for your opponent, unlike the vehicle being some really easily ignorable thing that sometimes once in a while can pop off and maybe do decent damage. Next is Marneus Calgar, and I did not expect to have this guy in a negative top 5 so soon, but I think this is time for us to talk about him. He is now 10 points more expensive, and the total cost for him and his unit is 210 points. He's still badass and a great character, don't get me wrong, one of the best in the Imperium in my opinion. But why I want to focus your attention on him is because Guilliman, his Primarch, is not more expensive. He did not receive any bump to his cost whatsoever. He's still the whopping 345 points, but I honestly think that he is more than worth it. That means that you want to run him always, and I mean all the time. You want to run Guilliman in every list, because if you don't, I don't know why you would not want to run him. He's such an important, amazing anchor for your entire army. Whether you're building a more melee focused list or a more shooting, especially if you're building a more shooting list, you want Guilliman, and he's gonna be making your whole army much stronger, much better for the entire game. And then at the end of the game, you still have a whole Primarch that also can stand back up from death on a 3+. And Ultramarines Gladius, just so you know, are my competitive current list that I run, and I just last weekend went to an RTT and went 3-0 with my list. So I really am interested in making the Ultramarines the most powerful that they can be, and I haven't missed Calgar so far ever since I cut him out of my list. And let's break down why you would want him in your list in the first place. He gives you a command point in the command phase, but unlike Guilliman's ability, which essentially is a 12-inch aura of you make any strat 0 CP once every turn, this is only in your command phase, and it essentially replaces the stratagem, the command point that you get when you discard a card. You cannot get both, meaning that let's say 3 turns out of 5, you're not going to be able to use it because, well, if you have discarded the card already, even if you say 2 out of 5 turns, you'll still not get the full efficiency of this ability, unlike Guilliman or Captains that essentially give you a free command point. They expand your capabilities, where here he only expands your capabilities in a turn where you have been successful in scoring both of your secondaries. Also gives incredible mobility and some ablative wounds to a unit of infantry, and I obviously understand that he's also a massive beatstick, so he does great damage in melee himself, but for now I'm just interested in the part what he gives to the army and to his unit. And yes, that mobility is very nice, and I used to run him along with Biologists and either Eradicators or Aggressors in the infamous Fire Discipline combo. Fire Discipline is pretty much dead now. You still need mobility. However, I found that Repulsor gives me better mobility because if you advance, say, 4 inches with Marneus, the unit goes 5 plus 4, that's 9 inches. If you put the Eradicators or Aggressors in a Repulsor, that's a 10-inch move vehicle plus a 3-inch move, 3-inch disembark, which is 13 inches. 13 compared to 9, and that was a generous 9 because advance is either 3 or 4 on average. So it could be an 8-inch move, or it could be a 9-inch total move. So the Repulsor definitely gives you better mobility. Yes, you could say that the tank cannot move through walls, and you'd be right, but I found that very often you move up to the wall and then from there you can disembark. Plus, the anti-tank shooting that you get from the Repulsor is pretty indecent. It's extra 3 good shots that you get and a bunch of small anti-infantry shots. Obviously, Marneus is also providing you with some shooting, but less than Repulsor, definitely, easily. And 16 wounds at toughness 12 on a tank. Yeah, 3+ save only, but it's still some save, and in cover it is decent. It's not amazing, but it's decent for a price of 180 points. I found that people often try to kill the Repulsor first things first, and it's not really a great idea because the Repulsor is not really the most important part of my army. However, it looks like it is. Where Marneus is exact opposite. He looks very important, and he is very important. He's very expensive as well. He's more expensive than a tank by 30 points. So yeah, I found him to be redundant so far in my testing. Of course, his mobility would be superior still for a melee unit because you cannot charge after you move with the transport and disembark, but I don't think that melee unit led by Calgar, so a very expensive unit, almost like a quarter of your list, is necessary for the current meta for the Ultramarines. All in all, I think it is time for us to at least think about Marneus, and perhaps he deserves a small break until next time where he becomes an absolute boss again. absolute boss and necessity because he is still a boss. Next, last but not least, are the Centurions, and these guys have actually received a big points decrease of 20 points for 3 and 40 points for 6, and now they're 165 for 3 and 330 points for 6. And you might think, well, why are they in the list of things that you want to replace? The reason being, if you didn't know, Uriel Ventress, which was the solo thing that gave them mobility by granting them Deep Strike, can no longer grant them Deep Strike. They don't have the keyword Gravis or any other ones that he can give the Deep Strike, unfortunately. This means that they are back to being an extremely slow unit. You used to run them in Vanguard, where you could use a stratagem to make them go up into reserves, and then when they came down, they still have the Deep Strike keyword, meaning that they could Deep Strike or come from reserves wherever they wanted to. Now, you can technically still use that strat, but you can only deploy within 6 inches of the edge of the board, and that is not really where you want to be. I've tried that, and believe me, it's so easy to screen, and sometimes you just cannot find a correct angle, and Centurions were all about correct angles. They wanted to find the best spot on the board, land there, and be safe there, because they're so damn expensive and important for how the Vanguard list operates. Librarian Dread, unfortunately, is in Legends now, so the only other thing that I know of that gave essentially teleportation across the board is no longer available. So this brings back their century-old problem, no pun intended, of being a slow 4-inch moving unit. And to be honest, even playing them in Gladius, where you can advance and shoot them, is not really going to change that problem, because yeah, they are just way too slow, and they're way too chunky, so you cannot even put them in a transport properly. You can put a 3-man into the repulsor, but that would take up 9 out of the 14 seats inside it, which can work for some lists, I guess, maybe, but not for most. Now, for you all Vanguard players, I think that all is not lost, and we still have some really good shooting units. We just have to now switch away from the Centurions because they just don't work anymore, and we need to focus on other infantry choices that work, and that is, I think, Inceptors and Eradicators. Both of these are really good, anti-tank, anti-everything for Inceptors shooting. They are neither of them the same thing as the Centurions. Centurions are unique in that sense as a long-range anti-tank. Eradicators are not long-range. Inceptors are not really long-range as well. They deep strike wherever they want to, and that makes their range, effective range, higher, but it's still not the same thing as landing and then shooting across like half the board. Both can be a very good anti-tank. Inceptors with +1 to wound are amazing, and deep striking within 6 inches means that in most cases they will also be able to find an angle to pretty much any tank, however well it's trying to hide. I've personally have deep strike last tournament in a squad of 6 Inceptors against what was that, a Wave Serpent, I think, yeah, and the Wave Serpent was pretty much inside a ruin and covered like completely, and I found an angle where 6 of the Inceptors could just barely see the tip of the fin of the Wave Serpent, and they've been able to blow it up despite the transhuman that it has, which means that they are really good at solving a problem of killing that one thing that is really hard to find an angle to and actually hard to do damage to as well. Indicators are also great at the anti-tank role, obviously because of their full rerolls of everything, damage, hit, wound against vehicles and monsters, and the fact that they can benefit from the +1 to wound as well. They can compensate the lack of speed and range by using transports, or actually just using the plain good old Uriel Ventress, which can give them the deep strike still. I'm not gonna lie, the Vanguard will sustain damage and probably will drop in its performance competitively speaking, but I think that it's still playable and you can still make a good list with the tools that we have in use currently. But I would love for GW to revisit this topic and see how the Centurions could be improved for the purposes of actually using them, because this unit is going to be underutilized now, massively so. Let me know what changes you have made to your list after the Balance Dataslate. I would love to hear that in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.